it's always a hard thing being the first session right after lunch, right? Everybody's still digesting their lunch and everything. So, and a doubly bad thing for us is that actually we're in this studio where we have to have these headphones, but hopefully everyone can bear with us. So our session, and just a quick introduction, by the way, my name is Aaron. I'm the CEO for ScamAdviser.com. ScamAdviser itself is we're a website. Millions of Americans check us every month, daily even, on bad websites. And we, as part of our two-pronged approach to fight scams, we believe in the two-pronged approach should be both ways. So one, we should empower consumers with tools to enable them to identify and empower them to look and avoid scams. But of course, on the flip side, businesses should be there to have their implementations in place to combat against scams. So hopefully in this session today, as our track name is Just-in-Time Fraud Prevention or Scam Prevention, we're going to be looking at, we have a flurry of experts here, a lot from financial institutions, but also from various platforms and tech providers as well. So we would like to see in this kind of area, like what the big banks are doing, what the other platforms are doing, and how can they work together to do this sort of just-in-time fraud prevention, right? And before we get into the last part, so as part of our session, we'd like to do something more interactive this time. So this QR code here links to a Slido. In our last session for today, we would like to actually debate on some other just-in-time fraud prevention measures. Everyone feel free to submit your ideas, and then at the very end, our panel of experts will debate on, or maybe not debate, but point out the merits and maybe why this has not been implemented yet. So hopefully that makes it a much more interesting session for everyone as well. All right. And without further ado, let's get into the first session that we have today. So first of all, I'd like everyone to give a warm welcome to Paul Benda, EVP of the American Bankers Association. Paul, welcome up. I think you just, all right. Right. Yeah, have a seat. Yeah.
Is it on?
I believe so. Yeah, yeah. Oh, there we go. There we go. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Right on it.
All right. So, Paul, of course, you've been a veteran in this industry for a long, long time as well. And I think you also have a very special perspective because you are from the association, right? So I'd like you to just talk a little bit about, like, what does it mean for the association in terms of doing stuff to do, anti-scam or just-in-time scam prevention?
Sure. So my role at the American Bankers Association, we're the only financial trade that covers banks of all sizes. So we deal with, JPMC, the largest bank in the U.S., down to the small $50 million community banks. We also, the American Bankers Association, is also a member of the International Banking Federation. So these are consortium of all the different banking associations around the world. So we have both the national look as well as the international look. And what we're trying to figure out is, in the past, we were focused on fraud. We were focused on brute force attacks. The consumers were getting attacked. Their accounts were getting hacked. We don't see that. We still see that, not as much anymore. It's now the authorized push payment fraud. Right. And how do we shift to the prevention side of things? We don't want to have the conversation about who's liable for it. We want to have the conversation about how do we not make these payments in the first place so the criminals don't get their money, so they don't continue to attack Americans and people around the world. And so that's really trying to figure out, how do you get good quality information that you can act on quickly to prevent a scam? And that's the key part is, information sharing is great, but if you're not sharing the right kind of information at the right fidelity, at the right quality, that doesn't allow a bank or internet service provider or a telecom or a social media company to act, it's useless. You need to have that fidelity of information.
Right. And I think it's funny we talk about this because I've joined maybe 7 different summits at this point. From the very first summit I joined, everyone was talking about information sharing. Yep. So how do you balance that? Like you said, you serve like the huge banks and the small community banks as well. Yep. So what does that mean in terms of, okay, they want to do data sharing. Everyone believes that data sharing is important, but how do you as an association help facilitate that with such varying resources between these banks? Yeah,
that's exactly right. And then, so one, we have to make sure we've got the regulatory overlay that allows us to do that. And so, in the past, you hear people, those knowledgeable and have heard of Patriot Act 314B, which provides a safe harbor to share information around AML and fraud. The problem is A lot of banks handle that differently and don't necessarily agree with the fraud one. Can we use Regulation P that allows us to share? So you got to have that regulatory piece, and providing clarity around it is one thing we're focused on to allow banks to do that. The other is what's the technology out there, and that's where we lean on folks like Ben Chance at Early Warning Systems, who can develop those technology, the core service providers that actually provide the back end of a lot of banks. And how do you create the partnerships that allows the sharing? It doesn't do us any good if one consortium of banks has really good information sharing and controls, because the criminals will figure that out, right, and they'll go down the street to the next bank. So how do we bring everyone under that umbrella? And it's hard.
And do you think like there's a difference in, because you also work with the International Banking Association as well, right? So do you think like there's a specific difference? You talked a lot about, how to decide and convene together on what regulation we should use. Yeah. Do you think that, and this might be a more broader topic, is there a big difference between what's happening globally versus here in the States?
There is. I mean, I think you can look at different models. Europe just came out with a new model. Australia, we think, has a great shared responsibility model. What we're trying to do at the IBFED is lay out the scam ecosystem. What are all the players in that? Whether it's the telecoms, the social media companies, the crypto companies, the banks, the internet service providers. What are the mitigation measures being done in each of those countries? Whether it's KYC for financial services ads, whether it's confirmation of payee for banks, and then figure out what's working in each of those jurisdictions, and could we come up with a global baseline? So can we figure out, okay, this is what banks should be doing, this is what social media should be doing, this is what telecom should be doing, and then advocate for that around the world? Because if we solidify here in the States, that just pushes to the UK, or they solidify in the UK, they're going to come attack other people. It's the exact same thing if you just do a small portion of banks. So how do we do this internationally?
Right. So from your perspective, you would much prefer if everything is globalized in this aspect, right? To have like just one set of rails or framework that can be done around the world.
Yeah, and if you can get to that point, then we can start talking about the information sharing. We need to be able to share, because these payments go worldwide, and so just locking down U.S. accounts doesn't solve it, because they could go to Hong Kong, they could go to Russia, they could go to France.
Right. And on the topic of information sharing, because actually before lunch, and the panel like just right over there, there was also a very finance focus, and they were also talking a lot about information sharing. So what do you think right now is the biggest hurdle, if you will, that's stopping this? Like everyone says it's important, you have the regulations. Is there anything tech-wise or any specific hurdles, anything that you would like to push through? Like if you could just say, I want to push through one thing, like what would that be?
I would like to have a safe harbor for anyone sharing information in good faith to prevent fraud.
Okay. And anyone, right? So not only banks, but also for other platforms as well. So actually, I think that will touch nicely into one of our other panels, and that is why we structured this particular track this way. So it's not only the financial institutions that are part of this, the other platforms, right? Where the actual users, where the public actually are, that's also very important as well, and they should also be part of this conversation, and not just like confined within the financial institution space.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So that was nice. And looking ahead, what about when we talk about public and private sector collaboration? So any thoughts on this? And how do like technology partners such as ourselves work with the banking institutions or otherwise to help facilitate this?
Yeah, so I think, touching on the public-private first. So we applaud the UK Home Office for taking the lead for setting up the Global Fraud Summit. We know they've come up with a set of principles that would apply to all sectors. And we are supportive of what they're doing, so we think that's a great piece. And then I think it is, banks know banking, but they don't necessarily know social media. They don't necessarily know telecoms and other pieces. So there's always a role for outside tech companies to help us decide and filter through the amount of information. If you look at scene data, right, that you're getting, you get massive amounts. These are your cyber logs. And it's really hard to know what are those anomalies that you need to be aware of. And same thing with financial transactions. There's billions, trillions of them. So having companies that can leverage AI, can leverage different capabilities and present, that actionable intel to banks and others is really key.
Okay. And I like to just touch on a little bit more here, because when we're talking about information sharing, a lot of times it always goes into the back-end systems of the banks, right? And then you have your own risk models, you have your own escalation process. But I like to talk a little bit more from the consumer side of things as well. So we know how there's like various banks have their own various methods of escalating a situation, like adding friction into the customer journey. From an association perspective, or even from your own personal perspective, like what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I've said for a long time, faster payments equals faster fraud. Yeah. So, I mean, everyone's heard that, and unfortunately there is some truth to that. So confirmation of pay is a perfect example. Okay. So, my name is Francis Paul Benda. I go by Paul Benda. So if someone sends me a wire that says Paul Benda, and is it going to bounce back? Am I okay with that? Yeah, I probably am because I want to make sure I get that wire goes to the right place. So I think consumers, everyone wants to have their money faster, but if you were to present it as a choice, well, you can get your money faster all the time, but you might lose some of your money, or you can get your money faster most of the time, and we might have to slow things down. I think people will choose that. So I think friction, when it's done right, and you explain the value of it, I think is going to be a lot more accepted. When people don't understand the value, then they get, like my credit card was declined. Why, I'm in my hometown. Why did my credit card get declined? That's really irritating. But, oh, that wire, you have to redo it because the name was wrong. Oh, well, thanks for checking.
Yeah. I mean, that should be built into the system, actually. And why is it not right now?
In the U.S.?
Yes.
Well, so we have 4,500 banks. We have 4,500 credit unions. We have 5 different payment rails. And so it's really, that is the hard part. But I will tell you that there is movement, and the first confirmation of pay was done by Zelle, actually. And I will tell you, it makes me feel so much safer when I put that phone number in, and it's got the name there, and it says that's who it's going to. And I think that type of thing, so we've already got it in one of our instant payment rails. I think there's talk about moving it towards FedNow, maybe the others, and I think there needs to be a graduated path towards that at some point. We're going to have to go there eventually.
One final question before we get to the closing thoughts. So obviously, like, you have the UK system of reimbursement. I think it's been like a lot of people have different thoughts on this, whether it's good or bad, or maybe this is not the way forward we should go to. Yeah. From Paul, from your perspective or from the association perspective, or what you're hearing from most of your member banks, what's the consensus on this so far, if there is any?
Well, I think that we have shifted our thinking for a while. When you talk about a reimbursement framework, banks are at the end of it, and it's really hard for them when someone presents with a good story because they're trained by the criminal on what they should say. They have the right words to say. It's really hard to say that bank should be responsible for allowing not having that payment go through. We think the Australia model of a shared responsibility model, where the social media has a responsibility, telecoms have a responsibility, banks have a responsibility, and if we don't meet our obligations to the customer, then we're okay being liable for that. If we don't do what we're supposed to do, we're okay with that. But to say we're responsible for everything, that's unfair, and frankly, it doesn't do anything to prevent the criminal from getting their funds. It's going to incentivize them and incentivize customers to make risky decisions because they know they're going to get reimbursed. Mm-hmm. And we know criminals will tell that to customers. We have Reg E here in the U.S. where if your account is broken into, a bank will make you whole. We've actually had instances where the criminals say, well, here, share your screen, I'll make the payment, and that way if there's something goes wrong, your bank will reimburse you. And so they will leverage that against us, and that's not the regime we need to be setting up.
All right. And this has been a great talk so far. Any closing thoughts you have for the audience or for today?
I think it's just, we're all struggling with how do we move towards the prevention side of things. So I think there's a role for law enforcement, and we want them to attack those overseas scam centers, but we really need to be focused on not having the money leave that customer's pocket in the first place. That's where we need to be laser focused on. And I think that shared responsibility model, everyone needs to pull their own weight. And frankly, if you're negligent in pulling your own weight, you should be liable.
All right. Thank you, Paul. And this is a great segue into our next panel, which is going to focus on the financial institutions. Thank you, Paul. Big round of applause to Paul as well.
Thank you, Eric.
And let's go into the second session for you.
Great. Panelists, come on up. So we are going to do a panel here with some good friends of mine from different financial institutions, talking about just-in-time fraud prevention. Talking about we called it an audible on one of our questions, so you're going to hear unscripted remarks here in this space. And then I think we'll have to just share some microphones going forward. So I'll just ask them if you guys could go down the line, just introduce yourself, where you're from, and maybe kind of your purview. And Travis, if we could start with you.
Sure, great. Hi, everyone. Travis Moseley. I lead our scam prevention team for the Capital One card business.
Hey, everyone. Ben Chance. I lead fraud prevention for the Zelle network and set the Zelle network operating rules, and I run a fraud consortium through early warning systems.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yilgoren. I'm leading security solutions for Mastercard North America, which includes fraud, cyber, AI, disputes, and resiliency.
So, I mean, I think it's great. We've got a panel up here. So we've got Capital One, well-known bank, really technology forward-focused panel. Early warning systems, for you that don't know, this is a lot of the back end that provides a lot of the fraud prevention capabilities that thousands of banks use and credit unions. And then Mastercard, everyone's gotten a fraud alert on your credit card. This is the stuff that Mastercard provides. So these are the people that will actually help us get to that prevention point of thing. And so what I want to start with, our original question was, we know that the criminals are exploiting the speed and real-time payments that are out there, right? From your organization's view, what has changed in the way financial institutions detect and intervene in scams over the last few years? And then the curveball to throw in there is, so what's changed in the last few years, and how are you going to handle agentic AI payments as they come down, and we're not even going to have humans in the loop making these decisions? So how are you going to adjust that? So Travis, we're going to start with you. You get the first crack at that.
Well, great. I think at Capital One, the biggest things that's changed over the last few years, we've gone through this technology transformation where all of the data that we have available from Capital One and from partners like EWS and Mastercard gets to us in real time, and we can make decisions and take action in real time to try to prevent some of the scams from happening when we can detect them. As far as the agentic commerce, when humans are not in the loop, that is a very scary thing. My personal perspective is I'd rather still shop online by myself. I pick out what color blue I want.
I know anyone's lived through a hallucination of an AI. It's like, I'm not sure I'm ready to have it start picking out what I'm buying.
But I think the important thing is this is just another evolution in the payment space. And when any changes happen, we need to be upfront with setting up the right frameworks for liability, authentication, those sort of things to build that and maintain that trust.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the fascinating part is being able to authenticate or that someone's authorized that payment. I mean, we still have some challenges with KYC, and now we're going to try and authorize payments for an agent is going to be a transition. So let me switch to you, Ben. I want to hear your thoughts on this, but I also want to know, what can you do today that you couldn't do 3 years ago, and what are you going to be able to do 3 years from now that you can't do today?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Good curveball. All right, I like it. I think I'll go way back. Like when I first started in this industry, 20, 25 years ago, we were taking paper applications, and there was no device ID fingerprint. There was no behavioral biometrics. You didn't even have a phone number, right? Or you certainly didn't have a mobile number, right? And then you were doing things in batch and in 3-day batch, right? And then you were issuing credit cards, and if you thought you made a mistake, you could use the mail transport time of 5 to 7 days to shut that card down before it actually got in hand and got used, right? Okay. That world is like a different, it's like looking, at dinosaurs when I think about that right now. It's so far away from the world we live in. So I think industry, Travis hit it really well, is everything has moved to real time. So what we couldn't do then and what we can do now is we can get and ingest real-time data signals and use those very quickly to split risk and to make informed decisions or informed alerts to consumers. So it's really, really powerful. I think what's going to change, two ways. I think the behaviors and how customers shop over time is going to change. Yep. I'm looking forward to my agentic AI shopper buying my same blue tennis shoes that I buy every year at Christmas and just doing it for me and getting on my door, and I don't have to worry about it ever.
They're going to be red, though.
Yeah, but one day they'll be red, and maybe I'll like them at that point, but right. I don't know. But so I think there's going to be this shift on how consumers shop. Agentic agents is one of those. I think the control frameworks are really important. Authentication frameworks are really important inside of that. But the net of all of that is, I think it's all about what are the additional risk signals and verification tools that we can use in real time, because the compute power is so much better than it ever was before. When we were building card models 20 years ago, it was like, okay, well, you can only score a subset of the transactions because you don't have enough compute power to score every e-commerce transaction. And in sitting in this room, it would be like unfathomable not to risk score every e-commerce transaction. I think that's the journey we're going to go on, and we're going to see more and better data coming in to make more and better decisions.
That's great summary. So Seckin, Mastercard, everyone's gotten a fraud alert, and I remember like a couple of years ago, I would have to tell my credit card that I was traveling internationally. Mm-hmm. Now I don't have to do that. So same question to you, what has changed? What do you think is going forward? And I'm sure I want you to explain the whole agentic AI framework for us that I'm sure you guys have in place, because I know Walmart's deploying it, right? So you guys are.
So no, thank you for the question. So I totally agree with both Ben and Travis that like the real-time data sharing has really changed a lot of the components. Even a couple of years ago, we would only have maybe specific scoring for specific transactions. Now we can bring like a transaction fraud risk, then we can bring identity information, then we can bring even threat intelligence information into scoring. So when we offer a score in the real time, it will have a broader perspective and holistic number and information, which will feel for both issuing and the acquiring side much more comfortable. And I think that's the biggest change. And eventually, I believe if you are asking a couple of the years in the future, is how we can add like the network score, but how we can also get the scores from the banks themselves and from the merchants themselves. How Apple sees me as a customer versus how like Mastercard see as a specific customer is a little different. So if we can bring these additional data models from the merchant and issuing side, will be very critical. Okay. On agentic side is interesting. We haven't, I will say, like figured it all out yet, but when you think from security, there are so many different components of it, and dispute is one component. To your point, is I order something blue and it arrived red. Like, who is responsible? What do I do? And
yeah, are you going to solve that? You guys got to figure it out.
We are working on it. Actually, it's like we have some ideas on that one. The know your bot, to your point, is like this is a different piece. Know your bot will be one critical piece, and also the cyber and the consent component. So I will give a consent to the bot to do some transactions on my behalf, but if they all of a sudden they start changing my password or changing information, which means that the bot might be acquired or the agentic system might be acquired by the fraudsters, which was published a month ago. As you guys all know, that was the first agentic attack happened. So I think there's a lot of components into that, and but to Ben's point, it will be the future. So we are obliged to work on it. We are obliged to live with this, and we just need to find a way how we can control as much as possible to help our lives and give us convenience while securing the transactions as well.
Yeah, I remember when Alexa first came out. So we're in Amazon, right? And you always get the stories of the kids who didn't put on the controls on the Amazon Alexa, and then all the packages start showing up at home. I think we're going to probably go through that exact same thing with agentic AI and start seeing these same things come down until we have those controls in place. So you guys talked a lot about the different how we can get more information more quickly. So why don't you keep in the back of your mind as we go into the next phase of this is try and be specific. So Seckin, you gave some specific good examples of what that information is. What do you guys need? And then this leads into the next question. So I focused a lot on prevention. What do you guys need? What information do you need? Not just with financial institutions, but if you had a partnership where you could get any data you wanted from Meta, or you could get any data you wanted from a telco. You guys have heard of the Scam Call program that's in the UK, where they're actually sharing real-time meta information that your customer's on a call, they've been on a call for this amount of time, it's from a cell phone, and now they're trying to send money to a new payee. You link all those things together and you shut that down. And so what are the things that we think that you think are most near-term for you that would allow you to do just-in-time prevention, and how would you communicate that to the customer? So it's two things. What are the data that you're looking for, and it doesn't have to be just financial institutions, but could be anyone. And then how are you going to communicate that to the customer of what you're doing, and then get through that process? So, Ben, we're going to start with you because Travis, that way gives you a little chance to think about it.
All right, there's a lot in there. There's a lot to unpack there. I think you hit it in the earlier session really well. I mean, there's an umbrella that's needed first and foremost. If I could have a magic wand, it would be one for safe harbor for data sharing across telcos, social media, ISPs, financial institutions, law enforcement. I think we're really siloed. We do well sharing data within a particular ecosystem, but not across the ecosystems. And I think that's where the exploitation happens, right? Yep. That's why the exploitation happens. To get super tactical, when I think about social media platforms in particular right now, which is, and I'll go back to my puppy example for anyone that was in the earlier one. It's really important to know if the person you're interacting with in a messenger type of platform is domestic versus international. And you know that based on the lag time between the chat messages, right? That's a really powerful risk signal as a consumer. Yeah. It'd be a really powerful risk signal for me to say hey, Paul, Paul is currently trying to buy a puppy from someone who's not in the United States, right? That's a really powerful risk signal if Paul tries to then pay that person via Zelle or ACH or wire. And I think those, like, thinking really critically around like what that kill chain looks like and how we could disrupt that. There's probably a million better examples. You've probably already put them in the QR reader. We could talk about those later, but it's that type of thinking that we need to get to, the free busy signal with the telcos, those types of things as well.
Yeah, that's a great example, Ben. Thanks. So, Seckin, you go next.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Like, I think behavioral analytics would be very critical as well. The way that before even transactions, before even we go to the payment part of it, how you can make sure that this is actually Seckin who is holding the phone. The way that I'm with my angle, am I right-handed or left-handed? The way that I'm interacting in I have maybe a fat finger problem. I always make a mistake when I enter my password versus a bot will enter it in like a very quickly. I think the behavioral analytics will be very critical to make sure that for an account opening, for the payment transaction, even before it's happening, we will have an understanding of if it's really Seckin or it is somebody is pretending to be like Seckin.
So let me just double tap on that real quick. So I agree with that. All of that data, though, is because we have the mobile phones now, right? Are you getting that because the permission's set on the banking app or on the buyer's app that allows it to share, or is it shared intrinsic with the operating system of the phone? So it's, and I'm asking like from a small bank perspective that might not have a dedicated banking app, right?
Correct.
Are they going to be able to participate in that, or is there a way to do that?
They will be able to as well, because if we are working with the processors or digital the wallet systems, we can still be able to do that. It's not only for the big banks or only for the telcos. I think that will be critical just from the data perspective. What like everybody will have the phone, or everybody will have even like a computer that will be able to understand if they are really genuine transactions. And then it will come to Ben's point about all the extra data that you'll get from telcos, from tech companies, from social media companies, that it will given all the additional steps, and until the transaction happening, we'll have a pretty robust picture about if it's likely to be or not. Then maybe we'll start step-up processes.
Okay, thank you. So Travis, want to go to you. Similar type of question, that specific types of data. But I also want, especially from Capital One as a bank, how do you navigate the false positive? How do you let them make, so we flag something because, I broke my right wrist, so now I'm holding the phone with my left hand, and it's a totally different process, and I'm different, but it's still me. So talk about, what does that friction look like? How would you navigate that? What are the signals you want? But we still want to prevent fraud.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll start with a couple of examples on the data share side of things. So just with Seckin's team at Mastercard, we've been working with them to develop new signals, proprietary signals for scam detection, especially on the merchant side. Mastercard has this broad swath of data. They know a lot about the merchants that are coming on board. We want to use that information to try to act faster to protect our customers. We're actually in the process of testing out some data products from telcos to get information like, is the customer on the phone? Are they talking to a number that has a VoIP? Is talking with someone over VoIP? Is the call international? Things like that. So we're piloting some of that information to help distinguish what I would say like scam versus fraud. Okay. A lot of our fraud models actually pick up the scams. So it's an anomalous transaction for the customer. They don't always spend $500 at Kroger to get a gift card, that sort of thing. The hard part comes in to understand, is that fraud or is that a scam going on? And the interdiction that you have to put in place is much different for either situation.
Right.
I can ask for an OTP. I can ask for some information on your card. But if it's a scam, I have to have a conversation with you. And so that is our interdiction. When we suspect scam, we make a proactive call to the customer and try to walk them through what we think is going on based on specific signals. And I would say the one thing that we kind of struggle with is how much information do we give the customer to help them know like how much we know and how confident we are and what's going on, but still make them feel like, data privacy and like sort of invasion of privacy, but still trying to do the right thing and protect them.
Well, and I think you're hitting on a key point that we've heard from other panels and heard yesterday, the human element, that a scam can't be just stopped by, a warning that flashes on the phone. There does have to be that human connection. So it's great that you guys are leaning into that space. One of the things that, you guys talked about, a lot of the different signals, a lot of different capabilities. None of you shockingly said the words artificial intelligence. So I thought that was going to be like the savior for us all. Everyone's going to use AI. It's going to solve all of the issues that are out there. So maybe could you touch on that, each of you? So Seckin, we're going to start with you.
Sure.
How is artificial intelligence going to make a huge difference for us, or And I'd also like to. What are the biggest fear you have from what AI is going to allow them to do? The criminals do to us. So how can we use it? And then what is one of your biggest fears?
Sure. So I think from our side, we were actually leveraging AI and machine learning since quite some time now. But maybe one interesting example, what we have started to do recently by leveraging generative AI is we are trying to create some new emerging fraud attacks and simulations and attacks. So because as we know how our customers are responding to transactions, we can actually understand by saying if this kind of new emerging fraud attack comes in, which banks might let it go through. So we can actually inform them by saying, hey, we just did this on our system just to understand, but be aware of this. If this comes up,
so you're building like synthetic data sets with AI transactions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then eventually we can pass them into authorization message by saying if it comes, they will be actually get a flag and it might just see that. Because we can see that only what's happening in the US, but we also see that from global transaction. If something is starting to happen in EMEA or LAC or in other regions, before it comes to the US, we would like to have some derivatives of this and inform our customers to be aware of this one. So will it solve everything? No, but I think it will really help us to test our system and to help our partners. The challenges will be is we still don't know all the different part of the usages of this. So that's a little bit like a shady dark side of it. And it sounds very real, it looks very real, but eventually with the regulations, but there's also a lot of the bias component into this. And so that needs to be, I think, resolved eventually.
Yep, that's fair. So Travis, we'll go to you next. Same kind of question. So I know Cap One's a technology forward bank. You've got to be deploying that. So
yeah, so we as Seckin said, we've been using AI and ML models for a long time. That's sort of the bread and butter of our fraud prevention efforts.
Oh, and don't forget what you're afraid of. So you got out of that, Seckin.
So we've been using it. I think we're probably a ways away from generative AI, mainly from a regulatory perspective. But our pace of model innovation is quite high, and I'm pretty excited about the speed of innovation that some of these capabilities really unlock. And I'm maybe a little bit of a contrarian when it comes to AI. I'm less concerned about what it does to the bank itself. We have budget, we can buy tools. I am more concerned for the everyday consumer who doesn't have the tools to be able to understand this is a fake. You see, it hasn't happened as much yet, but like the digital kidnapping where you can imitate somebody's voice or imitate somebody's face, like that's very scary. And like I said, I think we have the tools to detect, or will pay to have the tools to detect those things, but an everyday consumer probably does not.
So yeah, you're worried about the impact on the scam, the authorized payment fraud, that kind of thing. I think that makes a lot of sense. So Ben, how about you?
I'll just build on that a little bit, which is I think, financial institutions, networks, and other regulated entities that operate under the regulation, we just have a second mover disadvantage compared to the criminals, right? So they are exploiting and using tools and innovating on tools at a faster rate because there is no regulatory hurdle. They're not going to the Credit Risk Policy Committee or the Model Governance Committee or the other ones, and they're not looking to see if the lawyer approves this or doesn't approve that. And by the way, I think that regulation is all good and in place for a reason and should be in place. I want to be really clear on that. But what it means is there will always be these brief windows where the criminals are able to exploit something until our policy and our systems can catch up with that, right? And we talked about classic Annie spoofing earlier in a different panel, which is well, how is this still available? Why is this still going on, right? This should be the 800 numbers associated with banks and other entities should be locked down by the telecos, but it's still going on. Yep. And so there'll be this lag. I'm hoping the lag isn't as large in this particular space because we've been using machine learning and other types of models to detect and build fraud capabilities. We're not at the agentic stage yet for a variety of different reasons, but I can see a world where as a customer, you're getting a recommendation based on something that's running in your browser, how likely this is to be scam or not scam, right? Or you're getting that same type of rule is firing in the back end of a bank that's running on top of existing fraud and scam rules engines that's proposing a new scam rule that can be put in place for a real mode that just changed because something moved from EMEA into Americas today. And that's the sort of world I think we're going to live in.
That's great. So, I mean, moving towards closing here, what I'm hearing, actually, it's fairly optimistic from you guys. What I hear is you guys, I think, have the tools, technologies, capabilities to really prevent a lot of the scams if you are given, I think, the information and the regulatory ability to act on that information as you see fit. And so what I'd like you to do is just take, 30, 45 seconds, kind of summarize, your last points, where you think we need to go. And if there's a policy recommendation that you'd like to see implemented, that would be great as well. So Travis, we're now back to you.
Okay, I'll start here. So I think the two things that I would love is, and I think it's been mentioned several times, is framework for data sharing across industries, what we can share, how often we can share it, what we can do with that thing, and then some safe harbor on allowing banks to be able to take more aggressive action to help protect consumers and some guidance in that department. I think that would really free us up to really protect consumers and have a significant impact in the amount of scams that we see.
That's great. Yeah, I totally agree. Ben?
I'll take a subset of Travis's answer here, which is, I'm a huge fan of confirmation of payee. That's how the Zelle network is set up, and we provide that confirmation of payee back to the consumer in real time, so they knew they're paying Paul versus Francis Benda. And so I think that needs to be in place for all of the payment rails. And I think we as an industry need to come together and share that bad beneficiary information that we have in a more unified fashion. And so that goes a long way towards criminals jumping across different payment rails or jumping across different accounts and muling that money, which would then ultimately prevent monetization, which is the name of the game.
Yeah, and basically when you say bad beneficiary, you mean the accounts they're using or the person that holding those accounts, so that when someone leaves one bank and they go to another bank, they know they're a bad guy.
Precisely. I think that's it. So there's closing the front end of where the scam is occurring, and there's locking down the middle in the financial institutions themselves at the network level. And then there's, of course, the data sharing with law enforcement we already talked about.
Yeah, and I think, at the end, I think there's going to be a lot more focus on the receiver accounts. I think that is something that we do need to focus on. Seckin?
No, just 100% with both Travis and Ben's point. But I want to bring maybe one other angle, is the education angle. I think this angle is very important for all of us, because at the end of the day, is consumers are getting scammed. And I still think that when there's a scam happening, people are very embarrassed to share about this, but also when they want to share about this, they don't know who to go first. Like, am I calling my law enforcement? Am I calling my FBI? Am I calling my bank? Am I calling the merchant? Generally, the answer becomes always the bank, unfortunately, because the money has been shared from the bank.
Yeah, they want their money back.
Exactly, and they want the money back. But at the same time, is that something for all of us? And a network and merchant, issuer, education, or law enforcement, and even public and we want to make sure that how we can educate the customers in order not to fall to different traps, because fraudsters, they really know what they're doing. They know how different banks have different processes, and so they are very well educated. So we also need to make sure how we can be educated, and we can actually make sure the customers will not fall to this trap at the end. So I think data sharing, education, and also the pay confirmation of the pay, making sure that we are I'm sending the money to Ben,
to the right
not
person.
to Travis, will be very critical.
Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate your time today. It's been a great conversation. You're great sports on the curveballs we threw there, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, so that was a very nice talk with all of the financial institutions. So now let's switch gears a little bit and then move into more of the consumer side of things, the platforms, and of course the other tech providers in place. So next, I'd like to welcome up the next panel. So Lucia, Eugene, Amy, and Eric, would you just join me up on stage? Right. Yeah.
This looks like 2
Yeah, like maybe two. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me today. And as I mentioned, so we just saw from the bank's perspective, right? And so here today, I think it's very interesting because we have a lot more people who are closer to those that are getting frauded in the first place or scammed in the first place, whilst not necessarily like it's bank agnostic, right? It's not necessarily related to any single bank. So first of all, especially I would like to first ask Lucia and Amy for you guys. You know, what's the and I also find it funny because right next to us, we're talking about victim support as well. So, well, first of all, before we get into that, Lucia, would you talk a little bit about like what Match.com is doing? What are you doing, and what is your organization doing in order to combat or do just-in-time fraud prevention?
Yeah, so my organization is Match Group. We own a large global portfolio of dating and social discovery apps. Usually it's a little easier to say the ones we don't own. We do not own Grindr or Bumble. We own most of the other ones. So Tinder, Hinge, OkCupid, Match.com, Plenty of Fish, The League. You've heard of them. Just-in-time prevention plays a really important role in our strategy, and it basically manifests in the form of education throughout the user life cycle. So what that can look like is at sign up, at onboarding, you're getting mandatory education that you have to click through in order to make you aware of the types of scam and frauds that you might encounter while you're using a dating app. So that's like proactive education. There's also an email that follows, and then there's things like when you're in an actual conversation with someone, if we see you, depending on the platform, if we see you moving quickly to a phone number exchange, which if you know dating, does not happen immediately. Usually there's a little bit of back and forth. So if your first message is like, here's my WhatsApp, that's suspicious. And so we can leverage those signals to introduce prompts to the user to say, hey, like, this is moving quickly. How about like take a beat and here's a reminder of some of the ways to navigate dating more safely. So that's another type of just-in-time prevention that we have, which is like in-conversation prompts to kind of make sure the user has that awareness. And then I think one of the more interesting ones that I'm really interested in is our scam notifications. And so these are essentially if we have detected someone later who we have determined to be a fraudulent actor and you've exchanged phone numbers with them, at that point you've gone offline. And so we want to make sure that we're able to reach you. And so we will send an email to you to say, you know, Jack, who you messaged with earlier on Tuesday, has been determined to be a fraudulent actor. And so we want to make sure that you disengage from conversation because we've blocked them, but we can't go block them on your cell phone now that you've exchanged numbers. And so we're able to send that notification to the user to varying degrees of success. Usually the threat actor has inoculated them to some degree. We get a lot of responses that are like, Jack said you would say this. But occasionally we get a response that is like, you know what, I was on the fence about Jack, and this was a deciding moment for me. Thank you. So we do that based on different jurisdictional regulations. So we can't do it everywhere, but in the countries that enable that, we have scam notifications, which I think are the most powerful.
And I think we talked about this before, but the U.S. is actually one of those that does have this sort of like safe harbor in place, right?
Yes.
Whereas other places you might not necessarily be able to notify about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just like, I'm also curious, like you say with varying degrees of success, right? So I guess it's mostly about whether or not the scammer has already like sort of trained them to say, hey, there's going to be this notification from Tinder or whatever.
Right. So there's varying degrees of success. Like I said, a lot of the time the scammer has inoculated them. But then there are sort of like little moments where you actually see this is a really valuable tactic, and it's happening in conjunction with other industry tactics. So we had a user the other day who wrote in and said they replied to the scam notification email a full month later. And they said, hey, I got this email a month ago. I'm responding now because my bank teller today told me that I might be part of a crypto scam. And between getting this email a month ago and getting that information from my bank teller, something clicked. So even if the email, when it first arrived, didn't have the intended purpose, in conjunction with the fact that banks are also doing this type of notification, together those things worked to break the spell on that particular user. So even if we don't see the success, it could be more successful than we realize because it's happening in conjunction with others in industry.
And actually, I'm curious, how were you able to know? So, it was because the user actually emailed you back and said, "Oh, this is what happened."
We have very limited visibility into the success rates here.
Okay.
Users are not wont to, respond to every email they get from a platform. But that was one example of where it really came together and things worked.
Nice. Okay. Throwing this over to Amy now. So again, so this is kind of like some of the things that we've been doing. And the topic of our panel here is balancing friction versus customer experience. I think it's easy. We talked about it a little bit with Paul and in the previous panels as well as to, okay, how do we add good friction into the experience? And there are some that argue, hey, it should be as frictionless as possible. What's your take on that, Amy? Especially since you are you had a sharing yesterday as well with Lori, and very, very emotional. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, apparently yesterday I was angry. People were telling me and aggressive, so today I'll be quieter. She says no. So just a reminder, so I manage our Fraud Watch Network helpline, which receives 100,000 phone calls every year from consumers who are either reporting fraud or have been victims of fraud. So I think we need to have more friction, and not as restrictive friction in a bad way, but and bring the consumers on board of why we have this friction. And if you think about the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, how much friction there already is in our daily lives for everything that we do already, right? You got to put on a seatbelt. You got to check in here. Like, we're so used to it, but for some reason, I feel like when it comes to our money or these choices that we make around money or who we date or whatever, we don't want it, but we don't realize a lot of the times how much there already is. And I feel that with talking for 23 years to all hundreds of thousands of victims that I've talked to, they're wanting more and are asking for more, but they need to know why there's more. Right. I recently saw this YouTube video, and I don't know why I was on this one. And this guy was angry because his bank officer said something about him withdrawing $1,000. And he's like, that's none of your business why I'm pulling out. And he wasn't even a part of a scam. He was just taking out $1,000. And he's like, so I closed my account because that's none of their business. Well, I think if we explain to him why we're asking these questions, and it's like, we're looking out for you. And I think, Paul, you said it. It's like, do you want to lose money or do you want to have a little friction, right? And so I just think we need to put it into everything that we do when it comes to frauds and scams. And I'm just going to say one little piece of success that AARP has had recently, along with so many partners out there, is our legislation on crypto ATMs. So crypto ATMs, if you're not familiar with them, it's where you can most criminals are sending their victims now to these crypto ATMs, and there's about 39,000 of them across our country, and they're located at vape stores, gas stations, whatever. There's literally no friction. So you don't even have a teller to interact with. The only friction you probably have is opening the door to that store. That is it. You scan your QR code, you put the money in, it goes to the criminal. So AARP passed legislation along with our partners in 17 states, and I think we're on for 25 this coming year in 2026 to add more friction, because this is the number one to us on the helpline preferred method of criminals right now. And on each loss, we recently did a survey and found out that $40,000 on average that each person over the age of 65 is losing. And so we're trying to add friction to these machines.
I'll just add one point to that to say that I agree. I think if framed correctly, friction can be really valuable. And as long as users understand that they're part of the safety engagement and not just subject to it, they're very receptive to that. One of the things that we've been rolling out is mandatory biometric verification at sign up across Tinder right now. And that is very high friction. It's also high reward. We're seeing a 60% decrease in bad actor exposure, 40% decrease in reports of scams and spam. But most importantly, we're seeing a 20% increase in a lagging indicator, which is user sentiment. They like it. Like, it's a more authentic community. It's working. People enjoy it. So it doesn't always have to be like a bad thing.
100%. And I just want to say that what you're doing is working, because on the helpline, romance scams and celebrity imposter scams are in our top 5 victim reports right now. But where they're meeting their romance scammer, we hardly anymore hear on your platforms. And so that is encouraging. Yes, really. And so you're understanding that the criminals, because they know that this friction is working, they're going to other places to meet their victims. And so they can move around and stuff. But if it's in our top 5 and it's not on one of the largest, dating platforms, I'm not going to say where it is, but I think you all can assume. But I just want to say congrats.
Yeah, that's a very good sharing, and I'd like to move forward a little bit to Eugene, actually, because you had a session yesterday as well where you shared a lot of different things that Google was doing in terms of empowering users, and we've always believed in that, right? I opened it with saying that we believe empowering users as well as businesses having control. That two-pronged approach is the key to success. Eugene, hearing what they just shared and how they balance friction into it, does that actually change your perspective on how maybe you should be rolling out some other security features, or how you would design these security features?
Yeah, it's a great question. Also, it's great to see the biometrics as part of the KYC process, because I think that's been an important aspect of it, is during enrollment, having better friction. Once users understand that's why it's there, they appreciate that, and that education does go a long way. In terms of we saw in the demo, thank God the demo worked yesterday. Very stressed out. I had a tub of ice cream when I got home. Yeah, live demo. Seven features to demo back to back. It did crash at the end, which was pretty funny. But so what you saw in that demo is actually varying levels of friction. Actually, so we certain things we alert, and I think we have this going back to that diagram I showed yesterday. The goal was, can you be subtle, and just increase when it's really critical. And so what we didn't show in that was the first step was always this identity verification process. It's just inconsistent right now, right? For calls, you have stir shaken. That's not widely adopted. For emails, there's various standards like DKIM and BIMI. For messaging, there's RCS for business now. So you do have these things, but they're not getting heavily adopted. And there's no actual, something I've been saying a lot the last few days, there's no defined KYC process that everybody has to abide by. It's kind of, everybody defines their own thing. There's no auditor for all of it. So it's it varies. And in those models, it can become whoever the weakest link is, that's what everybody could go through and exploit that first. That's the first layer, right? Everybody should learn to look for some kind of verification that caller is who they say they are, texter or whatever. The next line is then, okay, well, after they reach out, what are they trying to ask or do, whatever. So that's where you saw the warnings, right? The scam detection warnings. Those are just warnings. And again, depending on the thing, you saw the Chrome warning is a big red screen, harder to get out of. Certain warnings, less friction. So we try to be really methodical. But when it comes to really bad things, and you saw that malware as an example, we try to prevent that completely from happening and making it very hard for the end user to actually turn that and circumvent that, because we know high confidence that's a bad thing happening.
I'd actually like to just touch on that one a little bit, right? Because you did mention how there's advanced protection. It's set it and forget it. Amy, from your perspective, would you think this is something that you would like to maybe encourage AR members to use, or is this even more a little bit too aggressive in a way?
I mean, I would encourage our members to use anything that's going to help protect them. But what it needs to be, and I'm pretty sure it is in your systems, it has to be built in. It can't be an opt-in. Because a lot of the opt-in scam protections that are out there, people don't think they're going to be a victim, so they're not going to opt in. People say, I have this, I'm not knocking any of the apps. I have this great app. I have this great program. I have this great this. Okay, well, is it built in? Does it come in that system? No, you have to opt into it. Well, my mom is not going to opt into anything because she doesn't think she's going to be a victim. So it has to be built in.
Okay.
If I could just add to that real quick, and this is a great point. I met your colleague yesterday as I was winding down from this demo.
You met my mom.
No. I will convince her to turn on advanced protection, though. But they brought up the same point of like, this is an opt-in feature because there's a lot more friction, but with better friction is better security. And the cool thing that we've really thought about it is at the end of the day, hopefully those users also have the AARP app on their phone. And we've actually built so those features are all built into the platform, varying which ones are on by default. But that one toggle, I as a user can turn it on, or I as a bank, I as AARP can actually check to see if the user has turned it on their device. And as a bank, as part of your security posture, especially like if somebody's traveling overseas, you can say, we won't even launch this app unless this mode is running for the device.
Okay.
And similar for third-party apps like messaging apps and others. So we do have that
flexibility built in.
Yeah.
Okay. And now I'd like to throw it over to Eric as well because right. So you of course advise a lot of different companies, and that's part of what your organization is doing. So hearing all of that in terms of like, okay, I'm sure you listen to this a lot. Like, we don't want to increase friction. This is going to lower our KPIs and whatnot. Is that a real problem? And would this change, like this conversation change how you're approaching and how you're going to advise them on this?
I would say that, understanding where to place the right friction is a consistent problem that we see. But from a management consulting perspective, I'm working with potentially one siloed organization, right? So one side of the organization may own the fraud technology, they may own the mitigated controls, but the business, right, the revenue generating functions, they're the ones that own the thresholds, right? They own the risk tolerance and that type of detail. So what we see a lot, and honestly, I'm surprised how frequently we see it, is the right hand and the left hand not talking. And we're talking about communicating very well within the ecosystem. Like, a cybersecurity organization communicates really well with the cybersecurity organization, but like, if they don't have that converged security model, that fraud fusion model, like, they're not going to work very well inherently with the fraud team, right? They have a different remit, they have different resourcing, right? So those are the types of challenges that we see, which would impact, friction overall.
Okay, and so your suggestion to that would be that even internally, you guys should get your act together first, right?
That's honestly where we spend the most time, and it's cool. Like, I'm not aligned to one specific industry vertical. Like, I have health and life sciences clients, I have financial institution clients. But we focus on, and we call it converged security. It's historically been called fraud fusion, but we're trying to again bring it into the modern times, because converged security is the organization norming around a risk or a problem. And again, it's the whole of the organization doing that, not just that one function that owns, right, the intimate responsibility for it.
Got it. And then continuing on this train of thought, Eric, is so one of the things that we also aim to do in GASA is to have a global versus local perspective, right? And this is the U.S. Summit. So I'd also like to ask, like, of course, you also advise overseas clients as well. Is there a difference in how companies or organizations are treating, like, the topic of friction, like maybe in Europe and Asia versus here in the States?
I think there is a difference in how friction is addressed, and I think the prior panel talked about kind of the regulatory backbone in Australia and the UK, right? The mechanisms exist. The mechanisms exist to share information timely, right? It's going to get to the right controls. I think domestically in the U.S., it's sharing across the ecosystems. We don't necessarily see as much sharing or willingness to share in the U.S. just because, right, it's not the norm, right? I think looking again to UK specifically, like, they've done a wonderful job working together collaboratively across industries to kind of raise the overall visibility to these types of threats that they're trying to mitigate.
Can I add to that? Actually, this is something that we've experienced as well, and I covered it yesterday with the enhanced fraud protection feature, which the Singapore police force also mentioned. Somebody from Singapore government said something really interesting. I think it was last year when we launched this pilot. They said, we could have spent years working on a regulation. It might not have been the right thing. Would have been, instead we just said, we're willing to accept that you're going to do more friction for this to protect users. We give you the green light to do it, and that ended up being a case study. Should have won GASA Scam Fighter of the Year this year, but I don't know why. I'm sorry, it's still bitter. I wake up sometimes with, I know, there should be a GASA, like, focus group on that. But in all seriousness,
Or media group.
we did expand because of that. They were a case study that helped us expand into more Southeast Asian countries. We did it in Latin America, and ironically, there are certain markets we cannot deploy in that feature, even though it's really to protect users. It's very efficacious. Like it doesn't. There's been no complaints from developers, but because of the regulatory risk in certain markets, like we can't do it in the U.S., for example. But it would be great if there was better collaboration, then they could see the benefit outweighing, even if there might be one or two complaints from somebody.
Yeah, and I think that raises an interesting point, because even in the previous panel, we were talking a lot about data sharing, and I've said that throughout all these GASA summits, every time everyone has been harping on information sharing, but so far everyone wants to share, but for some reason it's not shared. Lucia, actually going back to you, I think we talked a little bit before about how you would like to share more data, actually, on your perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things we discussed in the prep sessions for this panel was one of my pipe dreams, which is being able to share good user data for which there's no precedent. So it's all very well and good for us to send a scam notification to a user and say, hey, Jack, who you matched with on Tuesday, is potentially fraudulent. It would be 10x more valuable if we could tell that user's bank, hey, like, just so you know, this person matched with someone we've determined to be a likely crypto scammer. So if in 2 months you start seeing those transactions, like, guess what? They matched with someone who was probably a crypto scammer. That seems, in theory, like it would be really valuable, and it's something that we would love to be able to experiment with, but for which there is no precedent to share that good users' data. Sharing the bad actors' data, which is going to be a set of throwaway identifiers that they never use again, and they probably didn't set up their account with that, is, sort of we don't know how valuable that would be.
So just to clarify again, what you're saying is, so we know that this user is being scammed. How about if I send this data over to the further down the journey into the bank, for example, to say, hey, this is my user, he's a good user, but they're being scammed right now.
Right. But I think usually when we're talking about data sharing in these instances, we're almost always talking about the threat actor and the threat actor identifiers and the threat actor device. We're not talking about the victims and being able to set up some kind of comprehensive consumer protection across platforms. We're talking about how to do, the bad actor detection, which isn't wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just, I think there's two sides to that.
Right, and this would be your wish list, if you will, to your pipe dream.
A girl can dream.
All right, and let's throw it over to Amy then, and to wrap up this session. So what are your last closing thoughts, or your pipe dream, actually?
I think my pipe dream would come back to the friction of just helping people understand the why behind it, and that we have to remind ourselves that we all have targets on our backs, and that, fraud victims aren't stupid, they're not uneducated. And we have to look at it as the same way, like every night when I go to bed, I lock my door, I turn on my alarm, I check my back door, I have the front light on, right? We do things every single day and opt in to protect ourselves. But for some reason, we don't opt in on scam prevention because we have labeled it as a stupid person problem, an uneducated person problem. And we know that that's not what it is. So that's my pipe dream, is again, that we flip it and just put those friction points in our daily lives to protect ourselves from the biggest target we all have on our backs.
But in order to ease into that, though, like, would it be better if this was done from an educational way and saying, like, letting people expect this to be the norm, or like, what would be your best case scenario in terms of implementing, or are you advocating for banks to just implement it?
I don't really know. I mean, I think the conversation is definitely changing than where it was 23 years ago. I think people are getting more aware that this is just a problem we all have to know about and worry about, but we still have to talk about it. Like, I saw the number from, the FTC yesterday that they released, and it's in, hundreds of billions of dollars. Again, that's almost too big for people to even comprehend. We have to bring it down to like the local level. And that's one of the things we're trying to do, is to get people to just understand how it affects them and how it affects their community, and to build into these protections in their everyday life. And if your bank's going to do something, if your credit card's going to do something, fan-frickin-tastic, but we have to do it as well.
Okay, good. Eugene.
I was just going to say, like, it's an enterprise buzzword, but in my own personal life, I implement the zero trust model. I don't trust my wife. I don't trust my kids. In fact, my son texted me this morning. He was at school and he said, "What's the Netflix password?" And I was like, "This is a scam. I don't trust you." Even though it was really him, but it was a great excuse. I'm just teasing. But I do agree, like, even though, like, it's this scam, like, evolution, there's so many different types. Like, it started with like 8 different scam categories, but underneath those are subcategories, like 350 different scam categories now. Nobody's going to keep up with those. But if the simplest thing is just healthy skepticism for everything, take a pause. What scammers are really good at is rushing you and pressuring you to the point where you've given up your critical thinking and you've outsourced it to the scammer, and you just start following instructions. It's a human nature. And that's why, if you see, what we're trying to do is trying to add the right friction to make them have a healthy pause, and then kind of like fall out of that spell and realize, oh, this is suspect. Okay, I'm not going to do that, you know. And in some cases, we block it further just because we have to.
Right. So you're also like advocating for this type of friction. Eric, closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts. I don't have any. No. I think one of the biggest challenges that we try to solve is information sharing, and it didn't hit me as hard until I kind of was listening to the prior panel. I think organizations, it's hard for people to understand that buying a technology alone is not going to protect you, right? You need the business processes, you need kind of the foundational competencies on top of that. And I think a lot of issues that we see are people that are actually, we get called in when people buy the application. They buy the FeedZai or the Assertify or the SoCure to enable, just-in-time prevention, right. And then they turn on all the bells and whistles. It's not tuned, and then they're like, we have phenomenal false positive rates. So I think, it's an education issue, and it's education and information sharing.
Okay. Well, thank you all, and I think if anything, I think this has been a very interesting. Like when I started out this panel, there were a lot of thoughts here, including like how to balance friction. Like we started out this panel by saying let's be as frictionless as possible. But I think throughout this entire panel and through our discussions, we now understand like okay, we should add some minimal friction, and in fact, it's a good thing, right? Maybe we should try to style this as a good thing for the consumers if we really are going to tackle this problem, right? Big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. Thank you all. All right. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. All right, and now I would like to invite my colleague Selena up. A big round of applause to her as she's going to share her personal story and as well as the scam prevention measures. Big round of applause, to you all.
Thank you, Aaron. So today I will share a little bit of my own scam journey I went through. The other part that we want to do is to ask you for a bit of input. So you heard a lot of things today, and what we want to do, if you want to scan the QR code, I know it's within the cybersecurity a big no-no, but for Slido we need it. And give you some, and we would like to have some thoughts around like what can we do better? What should we be doing? And then our panelists will give their opinions on it, if it's workable, yes or no. So thank you if you would be so kind to do this. So, as Aaron already mentioned, I am leading the initiative to expand ScamAdviser across Europe and the US. And in the US, our app is now live to have some proactive measures around scam website and caller ID. So, a few years ago, I was on Facebook. And I saw a really nice ad from a brand I really liked. And I was on the assumption that because it's Facebook and it's a big organization, the ad should be safe. So, and I also am very Dutch, so I like a good, sale. So I clicked on the link and I bought some stuff and I was really excited, ignored everything, but I was like, oh, this is such a good deal. I need to have this. I placed the order and I got a link like, oh, your order is received. I actually received a track and trace. And then it said a few days later, like, oh, your article arrived, but didn't arrive. So I felt like, oh, that's weird. So I tried to contact them. I didn't get any response. And then I felt like, let's call the bank. So I called the bank and I said like, oh, I received a track and trace and said it's delivered, but I didn't get it. And they said, well, you need to contact the store again. But the store wasn't responding in any way. So then I felt like, this is super weird. So I started to research it, and then I realized I was trapped in a scam. And I felt really embarrassed because I felt like that would never happen to me because I am vigilant. I know when it's too good to be true, etc. But I did fall for it. And actually, this is the first time I'm sharing it for a big crowd because I never told my family because I felt like really stupid. So a lot of these Facebook ads, because the actual scam I trapped in is no longer live because somebody, thank God, took it down. But a lot of times it looks like this, and there is a message where they try to go into people's emotions with a sob story about, oh, we're going out of business, so we're selling everything for a really good rate, buy it. And people think like, oh, let's help them. In hindsight, if I knew ScamAdviser, I could have checked the link and I would get the feedback on the site where, because I did look up the link and it had a trust score of 1. And that means that it's very likely a scam. So, and there's also the indicators why we think it's a scam. And this is the actual copy of the track and trace I received. That gave me a bit of confidence at the time, but in hindsight, it was copied to this fake website, which is also, showing up like, oh, it's sent, but it actually wasn't. So the thing that I was thinking about, like, what could have been done to stop these scams? Well, first of all, that's my own personal thought, is I really think that Meta could do more. They have the budget and they have the technology to get those ads down. The other part is more on the payment side, because at the time I used my credit card, so it wasn't within 3D Secure. But what 3D Secure does, it verifies that it's me, but it doesn't verify if the site or whatever you're using is real or not. And then there isn't any exchange across the chain. So maybe if there already was a signal that could have been shared with the bank, then the transaction could have been stopped. And the other part is, and we are already doing a lot, is creating awareness. But I also found one thing that someone mentioned today is, it's not only the education on the consumer side, it's also the education on the business side, which is very important. Because I go to a lot of events and sometimes I hear banks or industry speaking like, yeah, but if the consumer thinks they are talking to Brad Pitt, then they're stupid. Which isn't the case, because that is victim shaming, because there is so much social engineering happening beforehand that someone believes that, and that makes people not willing to speak up. So there should also be some education on. So this was my my story about scams, and yes, if you can give some input, then would be wonderful.
All right. Thank you, Selena, for sharing your story. And by the way, it's not like a sponsored ad or something, but we did want to try to explain a little bit about what we were doing as well. So we do see some questions being in here. So I think just for this session, like maybe you can all just like sit in the front here, and yeah, we could open this. Okay. So and there are a few. So there are actually quite a few submissions here. So big thanks to all of you. Some of them we've actually discussed. So maybe we're not going to go into there. Let me just, as she is doing this, I'll just read out the first one. Right. So first of all, someone said banks should implement an easy "I think I was scammed" button in the app. The UI prompts some questions, then reports to bank and network for faster investigation. we have many banks here. I think probably maybe you would even say that some of this have been implemented already. Yeah. Anyone want to comment on this? Yeah.
Let's go.
So that's a complicated question. I agree we should make it as easy as possible, but there's also regulatory reasons why we need to talk to you and capture information. It's because you have rights under Reg E or Reg Z to have your money returned, but we need that information, and so it's better if we have a discussion with you about the claim. But I agree it should be easier and less painful.
But I think that's a great point. And we definitely do want to talk about why some of this has not been implemented yet. Anyone else want to comment on this, or Travis? That's good, right? I think that's a good thing. Okay, the second one, and there's a few conflicting opinions here. One says the liability should be shared across the chain. So this touches back into what we discussed about sharing the liability, sharing how to reimburse the customers. But then there's another one that said the weakest link should be liable for the fraud in the chain. So thoughts on this? Yeah.
Yes, Paul?
I mean, I think that's kind of, they're saying the same thing in different manners, right? I think it's...
Yeah, that can be sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they're saying the weakest link, let's say if you're not doing due diligence on who's putting ads on your network and that's scamming a bunch of people, then you probably should be liable for it versus, if you've got a lot of controls in place. So I think that's that would be my interpretation, but I'd be curious whoever posted that if that's actually the right interpretation, if anyone wants to.
I think people just want to have someone to blame. Actually, that's the end. Okay, moving on. The next question is, I think you should go up, right? You should go up. Okay, so on my end as well. Anyways, how can we address the idea that people are too smart to fall for scams? And I think this might be, yeah.
I mean, I can tell you how we're trying to address it is to, sorry, I guess I should turn around, is to tell stories like Lori's yesterday, right? Like, she broke the myth that a lot of people have about scam victims. She's not, a 90-year-old woman sitting in the corner in her rocking chair with Afghan, and that's the image that most people have. She's a highly educated, successful woman. And I will say, with my experience with working with victims, I actually feel that the smarter, and I take that in quotes, smarter, meaning that you're highly educated, whatever, you are more likely to be a victim of a scam because your whole life, your brain has never steered you wrong, and you know everything, and you also are not in touch with your emotions. And that's how scammers scam us, is emotionally based. And so you're using your cognitive thinking, not your emotional thinking and your gut. But I have had doctors, lawyers, chief oncologists. It does not matter.
Right, but how do we solve that?
Well,
though?
I'm just telling you how I solve it.
Okay.
Right, I solve it by showing and showcasing these stories that break the myth and the mold.
I was just going to add, my dad's a nuclear fusion physicist, scammed 5 times.
I think I
I think I agree. Stories and getting them out there.
Okay.
I was just going to say that stories are really helpful, but some folks are like, when they hear the story, like, oh, that would never happen to me. So like personalization makes a really cool experience. I remember like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a website called takethislollipop.com, and it integrated with your Facebook account. And it was actually won an award for like a movie, and it made it interactive, and it showed what you would feel like with your data. And so anything that can personalize, like with my own situation, like I really do mess with my own family quite a bit to like scare them in some way, so they can see that it can happen to anybody. So personalization.
Okay. Thank you. Any final comments? No. Okay, I think that was a good one. The next one. So this one is interesting. So this is the terms and conditions around data sharing is currently focused on protecting consumers or marketing. So how should we? Actually, I think this is a suggestion that the terms and conditions should be modified so that data sharing is more for protecting other people as well, or doing fraud prevention, so that these consumers are more willing to share their data. So actually, and I think this is just from a financial institution perspective, though, is that I would have thought that this would have been baked already into the terms and conditions. Is that not the case, Travis?
Paul probably has something to offer as well, but it is in terms and conditions, and there's also ways to opt in or opt out of marketing at account opening, and then I think annually for like your privacy notice. I think maybe potentially this could be something for telcos as well, which is where we have an issue of sharing across industry where that could be included or covered. But this actually reads like what our T&Cs are, I think.
All right.
Yeah, and I think the thing, though, that challenges us is that consumers have legal rights that T's and C's can't override. So even if a consumer says, we want to share the information, a bank still couldn't just share specific personal financial information, just as they, if they wanted to. I actually think it's more of a Lucia question.
Yeah, actually, I was going to touch on Lucia next.
It's an interesting thought. I am not necessarily, I'd have to think through it. I mean, we have like baked into our terms of service just basically a disclaimer that says like, here is how we're going to use your data for safety. And so it's part of what you agree to. And then the other parts that you're agreeing to are the like marketing opt-ins and opt-outs. So I'd say like generally by design, it's separate, but I am not a lawyer.
Not a lawyer. Okay. So hopefully that answers that one. The next one is the U.S. should follow the U.K. around sharing liability for APP fraud. So I think we discussed this a little bit. I don't think we need to discuss this any further. Like, definitely we think there should be shared responsibility, but as we previously mentioned, it should be like people who are not pulling their share. Those are the ones that should be responsible for this. The next one, USA needs to implement confirmation of payee. I think we touched on this as well. There is the push towards this. It's just that there's too many banks, too many different systems, and so that's not. But we're trying for this, right? As Paul would attest to. So I think no disagreement here, right? Okay. More friction points to confirm if the client still wants to proceed with the payment. Implement a chatbot to ask questions if the client feels pressured, etc. So actually, I like to touch this over to first to Amy because we actually talked about this a little bit, and I like that they say that the question should be if the client feels pressured.
Yes, that's one of the things that we're trying to discuss more with these questions that were being asked, like so, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's great training for bank tellers, but oftentimes bank tellers or other people will say, could you be being scammed? Do you know who this money is going to? Well, of course I know who this money is going to because it's my boyfriend, Brad Pitt, right? Like, of course I know who he is. Let me tell you, Brad Pitt is very popular. And so, like, looking more at emotionally based questions, like, is someone on the phone with you right now? Do you have your phone in your pocket, right? Because most victims always are on with their criminal. Do you feel anxious right now? Is someone asking you to lie? Like, get more emotionally based questions. And because, again, that's how the scammers are getting them. So I think any of these things could be implemented, but we just need to almost flip the way that we're asking the questions.
Yeah, it's how the questions are done, right? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Amy. The one thing we got to remember though is a lot of these bank tellers are getting $19 an hour, and it's a customer service. Some are really good customer service reps, and some just aren't that empathetic, and they're gonna. I mean, so they need, and we are actually implementing. We know small banks like hold up a sign and say, "Are you on the phone with someone?" So I think those kinds of things we can handle. The emotional ones, I think, is probably going to be really hard for us to do. Sorry.
And I'm just picking on you because you're sitting next to me. But there's like, even when you're buying prepaid gift cards, there's even some like little kiosks that you answer questions now when you're buying a prepaid gift card. But a lot of the questions are you being scammed right now? Well, if you're buying the gift card,
useless,
right? It's like, come on. So again, but one interesting thing, and I like that phone thing, is so the DC Attorney General just filed a lawsuit against Athena, which is one of the largest crypto kiosk companies. And in the lawsuit, they included footage from the cryptos of the victims at the crypto machine, and every single one of them had a phone to their ear. And I think, again, because the criminal is telling the people what to be doing at that moment, and there is no friction, but I think the phone is a significant kind of friction point, that asking that question.
Okay. All right. Any final thoughts or feel good? Okay. Next one. Weakless link. Okay, we talked about this one. So this one is also talking about the TNC. Opt-in for fraud protection data sharing should be separate from marketing data sharing to encourage better allow participation. Actually, we talked about this one as well. So there are other like regulatory issues surrounding this as well. Telcos should work together to proactively identify and stop spoof calls. Well, I think everyone would say yes. Paul, you seem to have something to say about this. I know you struggled with this a lot.
It's interesting because I've got a different view being part of the International Banking Federation, and I see what a lot of the telcos do, say in Australia or the UK, and the proactive nature and the free services that they provide to banks. They don't ask banks to pay to clean up telco networks. The telcos clean up their own networks. Unfortunately, here in the US, it's really a pay-to-play regime. I would guess more than not, Travis, you're paying for any of the data that you're getting from the telcos. And so it's a challenge in that our caller ID system is completely and utterly broken. I mean, we're still seeing 1-800 spoof calls with bank names on them. It doesn't work. And now we're moving to branded calling, which isn't going to necessarily have any better controls. And so now you're going to have this logo on the front of your phone saying it's your bank or Amazon or whoever. And we don't see meaningful effort to fix that broken system. And that's a big challenge because they talk about blocking these things, but anyone that's got a phone has seen a spoof call.
All right. And just on a personal, so actually last year, ScamAdviser hosted a track as well. We hosted the telecom track. And unfortunately, there weren't very many telecoms that were willing and were wanting to join the track. So yeah, just another idea out there.
And I think that, Travis, because you work with...
We do, and what Paul said was accurate, but I will come to their defense a little bit because I've spent a lot of time in this space because I think it's so key to success. But they struggle with similar regulation and regulatory challenges for data sharing, taking swift action, making sure they're delivering the right calls. And I think in the other regime, like Australia specifically, I think it was the government intervening and putting the banks and the telcos in the same room saying, this is a problem, figure it out, is what led to that solution. So I think there's, government has a role to play here to sort of bring everybody together and come up with a common approach. And that applies to social media as well.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay, final home stretch here. Final 4 questions. Banks and social media companies should use AI to deeply evaluate the business. I'm not quite sure what this is asking about, so maybe if the person who submitted it could if you're too shy, maybe resubmit it. So let's move on. Is there any action to be taken against domain name registrars to stop the offensive scammers' websites from remaining on the internet? Okay, so this one actually for ScamAdviser, we can answer this first. So obviously, we try to report these to these domain name registers as well, and to varying degrees of success. It's normally easier when we have a coalition of different people. So we might go together with Google or Meta or maybe even a bank sometimes or law enforcement to go together and report this to the DNS. Or the domain name registers, and that's typically how things do get done, and things do get taken down. Unfortunately, it's still it's a very messy process, and there's a lot of brand protection companies that will say you can pay us to submit, and then they'll get it taken down. But just someone in this space, it's not as easy, and it should be easier. We fully agree. Actually, would there anyone want to from our panel? Okay, let's talk about this. You're probably going to talk about Google Safe Browsing?
No, I wasn't actually. Different part of Google. But when I first met Kiboga, he talked about this. And here's a good example. What you just mentioned, impersonation takedowns are easy because of the brand reputation. But what about fake merchants? That's really hard. How do you prove, and that's the thing that takes a lot of friction, how do you prove that somebody isn't actually offering a good or service? Me as a scammer, it takes me no time to set up a website, sign up with a payment transaction company, whatever. But then how do you go to that registrar and say that's where the concern is? Maybe is that I think everybody would love to solve that problem.
Right. And a lot of times, in their fairness, a lot of times they also have the obligation to keep stuff up. And
totally.
And if not for otherwise they will be accused of censorship.
No,
right?
I'm not knocking them. That's what I'm saying. There's no taxonomy for this. It's very easy for impersonation types of scammers, but for fake merchants, which is one of the biggest problems in Latin America and Southeast Asia, how somebody should define a process that would be the right way to do that without impacting real brands.
Right. Okay. Okay. How can financial institutions improve models that flag suspected scam merchants their cardholders are transacting with without knowing they're being scammed? I think this is for both payments or for banks.
Yeah, I think Hunter did a really nice job in a previous panel earlier today from Capital One talking about that. But I think, again, it's pulling in additional data and using signals. Like a brand new merchant on the network, by definition, is higher risk than a merchant that's been on for a year or 5 years or 10 years. And I think taking that sort of philosophical approach, which is not just the risk of the transaction, but the risk of the merchant, is really, really important in treatment strategies. I think the other piece, and we talked about it earlier, is Travis talked about it earlier, is it's not just what you do in terms of the model. The operational treatment really, really matters, because telling you that, you know, you just ordered a puppy and the puppy's never coming is very different than a fraud transaction.
I just want to share real quick. So this is a big focus for the card business at Capital One. So we try to detect these merchants, block them, and then communicate with our cardholder and say, hey, we blocked it for this reason. That way they don't pull out their Chase card or their American Express card or whatever card. And then once we block them, we actually try to alert customers who had approved transactions at this merchant and tell them they have an opportunity to get their money back. So try to make it as net zero cost to the consumer as we can in this space. And this is one of the spaces we actually have a way to give consumers their money back. So we're really trying to push the needle on this one.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. And we're running out of time. So the last two questions. The first one, you know, I believe everyone would say yes. We would like to work together if there is data that can be shared. So I think that's easy. Last one. If consumers knew of these scams, they would be more on the defense. What programs are there to educate consumers of all ages? Yeah, I think Amy would. And as a last one.
Oh, God, the pressure. We're not going to educate our way out of this. Let me tell you what. I talked to Lori, our victim, yesterday, and I said to her, I said, if you were asked 10 minutes before you logged on to LinkedIn if you knew every red flag of fraud, she said 100%. I would know everything about fraud. We are humans, and we make bad choices. We know we shouldn't do drugs, and guess what? We still do drugs, right? So it's a journey, but we can talk more about it. Whoever asked that question, I can tell you what we're looking at. I don't read articles about, being pregnant because I'm never going to be pregnant again. So why would I read an article about fraud if I'm never going to be a fraud victim? That is the mentality of a lot of people. So,
Here. All right. Thank you all, and have a nice day. Hopefully this was useful for some of you.
And thank you,
Thank you.
panelists.
Panelists, can you come up here and let's take a group photo?